Hello, everyone. I'm Josipa Petrinic, President and CEO of QTRIC, and welcome to our next Fireside Chat of the day. We're going to be tag teaming it today with two great speakers, one of whom you've heard quite a bit of from last year, Councillor Jay Robinson, who is the chair of the Toronto Transit Commission and councillor for Ward 15 in Don Valley West. And another person, Ben Case, who many of you have gotten to know over the last couple of years, a former director on the board of directors of QTRIC, and who is now executive director of Toronto Transit Commission's Innovation and Sustainability Program. So with those two great speakers here today, we're going to dive into several issues related to return to transit, faster, bigger, better, the future of TTC's urban rail systems. But before we get into that, I do want to acknowledge that I'm joining you here today, not from my current home in Toronto, but rather from Calgary, Okotoks, where I grew up. And I'd like to acknowledge that the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region represent this area in southern Alberta. And that includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, members of Siksika, Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Stoney Nakoda, Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley First Nations, the Dene of Tsuut'ina First Nations, and the Métis Nation, Region 3, all of those who have made Treaty 7 lands their home. With that, I'm going to turn the virtual microphone over to our colleagues. And just by way of introduction, first off, again, to Councillor Jay Robinson, who is the chair of the Toronto Transit Commission in her role as an elected representative. I'm going to turn to you first, Councillor, to kick us off on one of the core critical questions for those people who are here at our conference, for those of you who are part of the QTRIC consortium, and for several of the policymakers who are also joining us today. We're all aware that the Toronto Transit Commission moves 1.6 million people, millions of people across lots of geography, large spaces, every single weekday, including through the pandemic period, carrying lots of Canadians and Torontonians and individuals from the Greater Toronto and Hamilton areas. And we know that rail is a critical component to that public transit system, and that it is a critical component to climate action in Toronto, as well as Ontario and for Canada. And I'm personally a huge believer in Toronto. As you know, from probably last year, if you recall, I truly think it's not just a great city. It is one of the world's global cities of the 21st century, a home to immigrants, a home to refugees, and a home to diverse Canadians forward. And rail is going to play a key part of that. So the first kickoff question, I'm going to hand the virtual microphone over to you, Councillor, and if you can walk us through what are the large-scale rail projects that are right now under development in Toronto that are defining this city, and how are they transforming Toronto and the surrounding communities?
Well, thank you very much, Josipa. I'm really happy to be here again, and with Bem, one of our superstars at the TTC. So that's a great question. I have to say the expansion work that's happening in Toronto right now is substantial, and it will have a substantial improvement to our service in Toronto, but also something that I know you're focused on is connectivity. So for not just Toronto, but for the whole region. So the provincial projects include the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, which seems to be taking a long time, but hopefully we'll see the end of that soon, being constructed, as well as the Finch West LRT, the Yonge North Extension, Ontario line, and of course, Line 2 East Extension and Eglinton West Extension. So the federal government announced $10.7 billion in funding in the past May, as well as the province wants $17 billion that they'd already committed when the feds came to the table. So there's lots of money at play here. And obviously, it's an attractive alternative to driving. Certainly for me, I ride the Rocket every day, certainly pre-COVID, and I often joke about, it's not a joke, I don't know where my parking spot is at City Hall. I have no clue. I've got some parking spot there, never been in it. Because why drive when you can take transit? And we've done a study, CD Howe did a study. This is kind of a dated study, but still, we've learned that congestion costs our city close to $11 billion in lost productivity. I'm sure that number's way higher now, but this is about servicing neighborhoods in our city. We're a city of neighborhoods. Former mayors have always talked about that. That's who we are. That's our brand. And what we want to make sure is we have a walkable, transit-orientated neighborhoods, communities in Toronto. And of course, the ripple effect, the benefit is that substantial environmental benefits. So Really, new transit is really about bringing that change. And as we do that, we need to engage impacted communities in the process to deliver the best outcomes. And the example is Thorncliffe Park in my ward. We moved motions to ensure that this supports employment of local neighborhood improvement areas through community benefits. So there'll be employment through construction, and then of course running the system for these areas. So we moved motions that will help make sure some of these newcomers, as well as some of these refugees, are going to get jobs as a result of this. So the other thing I have to mention is the Bloor Young Station work. It's phenomenal. This is the busiest station exchange in all of Canada, and we're undertaking a $1.5 billion expansion. So it's pretty exciting. Also increased capacity and accessibility to our streetcar network, 60 new streetcars, thanks to our federal and provincial partners. And bottom line, this is going to expand the lifespan of our system. It's going to accommodate passenger demand over the next several decades and make a more connected, accessible city for the future and the region.
If I can, though, Councillor, can I dive a little bit into that? And then we'll go into the second question that segues into the kind of return to normal. It definitely, these rail expansions are going to transform the face of the city. There's no doubt about that. But in the chat I had with Phil Verster this morning, I raised a critical component. If you go looking across the Eglinton, Crosstown, or any of the rail stations, even at Jane and Finch, where there's a whole bunch of investment happening for Toronto, anywhere where there's a transit stop planned or expansion planned, you really can't find a one-bedroom condo now under $550,000 or $600,000. That's extraordinary. And I was just up at Jane and Finch a little while ago looking at some of the pre-builds, as a lot of people, looking for a new condo to buy. It is extremely exclusive. Now, on the good side, that means that transit hubs are a place for economic opportunity and investment. That's not the past, that's the future, that's great. But on the other side, it's a serious issue for Torontonians and Ontarians in terms of the housing crisis. So before we get into kind of the return to pandemic, could you give us a sense of this rail expansion public transit, what the potential consequences are in terms of that economic development and exclusion?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question and an important one. I happen to live and represent the Midtown area. And so I'm chair of the TTC as well as the city council, where a lot of that activity is happening. I can't tell you how many development applications are in the pipeline. There's a lot of condos being constructed, but also in the pipeline, like thousands and thousands and thousands of units. And this is as a result of the crosstown being built along Eglinton. So that's where my boundary ends, is Eglinton. So it's a deluge of applications for development. Having said that, you're absolutely right in identifying it's not affordable. And I have 3 sons that I would love to be able to live in our city that they grew up in. So it's a big problem, but I'm not going to get into it because it would take me half an hour. But city council is working on this and addressing it aggressively. One way is through inclusionary zoning, which we voted on just weeks ago. Your question's so timely, because we want to make sure developers are setting aside affordable units within their condos. And so I have been really pushing this and been interviewed about it a lot recently, because I feel they have to play a part. Developers have to play a part, not just government too, but developers have to play a part in providing affordable units for real people who live in Toronto. It's tough. It is very tough. And so this is what we're trying to address.
So it's great to know that, council's taking it seriously. And I think a lot of us know that council's really trying to hammer in on that one, make sure that it's diverse housing and mobility. And that actually segues into the next question that a lot of us have burning on our mind, this return to transit scenario and the return to normalcy, whatever that might look like. People starting to return to Bay Street, people starting to return to office buildings. It's an unpredictable pattern. What does this period of economic recovery going to look like in the Toronto area as people start returning to their urban office spaces from a rail and mobility perspective. And I'll just add that I love the fact, Councillor, you mentioned you don't know where your parking space is. You've heard me elsewhere, I've said it many times, and Rick Leary's heard me say it before, so it's not surprising. I don't think the heads of transit or mayors or councillors should have parking spots. You know, if we're really serious about climate change, that's got to go. But you're just one subset, right? So everybody's returning. There's going to be parking use. There's going to be mobility, and transit's in the middle of it. Can you walk us through what that return to normal will look like?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. Who knows? None of us have a crystal ball. We didn't expect this last variant. We are very focused on recovery. So again, your question is unbelievably timely, because literally today we announced we're going to make sure city staff are back in their offices January 4th. A large percentage have been the whole time, but many more staff are coming back. And hopefully this will inspire Bay Street and downtown Toronto to get their employees back in the office, returning to normal. So it's a tough question. I will tell you something. Right now we're at 50% ridership average. I'll tell you the numbers: 57 for buses, 57%, 48% for streetcars, and 42% for subway. But during the darkest days of COVID, which would have been April 2020, we were down to 16% ridership. Those were tough days and very hard on our budget. So our first priority absolutely is return to normal and getting people to and from their destinations safely. I can't say that word enough, safely. Our top focus is safety. And so, we've had some very hard, dark days, but we kept going. We never stopped. The whole city kept moving forward, City Hall, TTC, through these challenging times. But we are very proud. Our service levels we've kept it high. We've supported essential workers through the pandemic, getting to their frontline jobs, getting to the hospitals, and we'll continue to do this to support economic recovery. So this is something we're very focused on as a city and as the TTC. We have been very focused on what the public health experts are saying and implementing strong measures to keep our employees and passengers safe. And so we did put in place a mandatory vaccination policy that's been a bit controversial. And we are seeing very high vaccination numbers. We're very pleased. And that's despite the fact that the leadership in our biggest union, ATU Local 113, discouraged their members, unfortunately, from participating in the policy. So that was very disappointing, but we've moved past that, and we're doing really well, and we're very pleased with how TTC staff have stepped up and been double vaxxed. So as you said earlier, the TTC moves 1.7 million people per day, or we did. And we've already seen some return of students, people commuting to retail, manufacturing jobs, and even discretionary travel. So we're thrilled. We estimate at this time that a roughly 29% of our demand is office workers. So we want to see that number go up. And we have yet to see, is the future return to normal or a new normal? We don't know. Again, that crystal ball would be required. But downtown return is key to not only subway and streetcar use, but also 30 to 40% of our bus ridership. So when it comes to service planning, the TTC's learned to be nimble. In the last 2 years, there's a silver lining to COVID. We've learned to be nimble, a big organization like ours, and adaptable. And I'm very proud of that. And we are prepared to respond to the changing travel patterns and continue to match service to demand over the course of the recovery period. So I'm really proud of the TTC in really being adaptable. What we found is our ridership levels were highest on the bus networks. I don't think you're surprised by that, as people traveled locally and within their communities. And we made frequent use of our run as directed buses to provide additional transit service where it was needed most. So that said, we are also looking at good transit planning, and we're preparing for the long term, but investment in and expanded efficient network of our service is critical to supporting our ever-growing population. I mean, we're bursting at the seams, and we need transit to support that, and we need it to support the next generation. And as a mother, I'm thinking about that every day. I think ridership is going to return. It's just a matter of when. And I want to say one thing I kind of alluded to it in your opening segment, but we've hit this rare political consensus with all three levels of government. It gives me chills when I say it, because regardless of political party, right now, all governments have recognized the critical role that public transit is going to play in our city's recovery and rebuild from the COVID-19 pandemic. Like, it's phenomenal how the province and the federal government, again, different parties, don't always get along, never get along, and yet they do on this aspect, on this element, that transit is really going to play a massive role, and it is the backbone of our city and the region. So whether it's new streetcars or the ambitious rail expansion projects that you started the session off talking about, there's been an unprecedented investment in Toronto's public transit network. So it's in a very exciting time. And even though we're dealing with a dark pandemic, it's also, there's a silver lining in this.
I definitely think that public transit is going to come out of this stronger. And two things you said lead us to the next question, really about the technological innovation component. You mentioned, Councillor, that at the worst parts of the pandemic, ridership dropped off to about 16%. Well, I would bet if we surveyed those 16%, it's probably mostly nurses and frontline workers who had to take the system to get to work, to get a paycheck, to live a living. And it'd be interesting to know if out of that, now knowing some of that composition, we could innovate new transit programs for those people, given their needs and requirements. And that leads to tech innovation overall. The second thing that comes out of what you said is we've got this recognition federally, provincially, municipally, that public transit's part of return to transit pandemic recovery, but it's not enough to get the same people back. We actually have to triplicate, quadruple the amount of transit if we want to kill congestion, open our cities, and address climate change. So we've got an even bigger issue to address in terms of massive increase of ridership. And that takes us to the technology question. So there's only so much policy can do. We need people as riders in there pumping money into the system that helps us do tech innovation. There's a lot of new innovative things happening in smart rail, like autonomous and connected rail systems, to move systems faster, move buses, move rail faster, cheaper, cleaner, and more efficiently and safely. Can you walk us through the kind of economic and technological benefits ahead that smart rail might bring to a global city like Toronto? And for this, I'll turn it to you and to Ben Case together to walk us through what some of those smart rail technologies could look like.
Thank you very much. I'll make some opening statements, and then I'm going to throw to Ben, who's the expert. But I would just start with a non-technical, non-innovative statement and say to you that in 2021, which is right now, but it was the first quarter, we got a very important study. And I don't know why we're not talking about the study that CD Howe did for us. I don't know why we're not talking about it more, but I will talk about it today to say that they have done an estimate that the TTC provides up to $2.7 billion in wider economic benefits for Toronto and the surrounding region. So the TTC connects people to work opportunities, education, social and recreational activities, which drives economic activity. And so I think that's important to set that up. And long commutes are not a good thing from every perspective, including being on the road leads to financial loss. So as I mentioned earlier, CD Howe years ago did a study on congestion, 11 billion in lost productivity. And so alleviating road congestion by adding more transit users and improving these travel times are critical. So I love talking about the ATC because it's one of my favorite things. And I'll just say, I moved a motion to say to Rick Leary, our CEO, if it's delayed 1 minute, I want to report to coming to the TTC board. That's how passionate I am about the ATC. But I'll tell you, Ben can dive into these technical details and operational benefits of smart rail initiatives and talk a little bit about ATC and one-person train operation, which we started last week fully, and then the yard maintenance subway system. So over to Ben.
Thank you, Chair Robinson, and hi, SIPA. So from a technical perspective, TTC's subway system encompasses a number of smart technologies. I'll start with smart trains and smart network. Today we have smart trains with onboard systems that self-monitor and self-report issues from wherever they are in the network. This ability of the trains to report on their health status automatically means that they can identify electrical, mechanical, software issues with systems such as HVAC and doors, suspension systems, communication systems, propulsion, brakes, and this can all be done in close to real time while they're in service. This provides us with access to data that we need to identify, diagnose, correct issues faster. In some cases, without even bringing vehicles in out of service, we can diagnose those issues, resolve them on the train, and there's no impact to the customer. In other cases, we can begin work at the back of the car house or at the yard before the trains even come back out of service. For our customer, this means maximizing vehicle reliability and fleet availability for service. In other words, fewer service disruptions. Next is our one-person operation and automatic train control system. We're continuing installation of a state-of-the-art ATC system on line 1, replacing the legacy fixed block signaling system that's now over 67 years old. ATC controls train speed, as you know, and the distance between trains automatically, which allows for increased capacity, reduced travel times, and more reliable service. We are already seeing the benefits of realized on roughly 86% of the network of line 1 between Vaughan Metropolitan Centre and Edmonton Station, where ATC is operational. Now, a quick mention on big data and analytics. All of these new systems generate an incredible amount of data, as you can imagine, that was previously not available. We can now analyze this data and predict and prevent problems before they occur. We can identify root causes for failures and investigate applications for machine learning to optimize system performance. Finally, on the long-term benefits of a smart transit in general, with smart trains, smart network, ATC, and the application of machine learning, will one day see these integrated technologies and connected vehicles across the transit network, not just subways, but also streetcar and buses. In this version of the not so distant future, our customers will see a level of service reliability and modal integration that would simply not be possible without these smart technologies.
And Ben, maybe I'm going to dive into it. We've got about 9 minutes left, so we have enough time to dive into it a little bit. You know, I'm one of those annoying middle-class transit riders. I demand the best. I take conference calls on the bus. I take Zoom calls on the train, and I expect it to work. And I expect there to be Wi-Fi, and I don't know why there isn't Wi-Fi everywhere. And I expect my bus and my train to co-communicate and not just be on time and frequent, but 100% safe. So my bus is never crossing the track when the train is crossing the track. So I expect all those things, and I think Canadians should expect those things. And TTC is one of the best positioned to deliver those things. Can you walk us through, like, apart from the ATC kind of technicality, the high level picture of autonomous and connected streetcars and buses and vehicles and trains and subway? What does that future in downtown Toronto look like, or across Toronto, when these systems are communicating with each other, hopefully in a cyber secure world? What does that look like for me as the annoying middle class transit rider in terms of the technology and also the facility?
So your first point about the customer access to Wi-Fi. So we have a midlife overhaul program scoped for the TR trains on line 1. And that scope includes the implementation of Wi-Fi on board. So with that overhaul, we'll be seeing Wi-Fi available to our customers. With the replacement of trains on line 2, our oldest trains, T1 trains we call them. Again, the new trains will have Wi-Fi on board, among other amenities for customers. The potential for that interconnected multimodal network that's leveraging ATC technologies and all these various communication technologies, smart technologies on board, it means that if you can imagine, you have a bus network, you have a subway network, you have a streetcar network, you have Wheel-Trans, and eventually you will have a first mile, last mile solution as well. And all of these systems here today operate independently, almost as if they're different businesses, different operations. And there really is no way to reliably integrate those systems from a scheduling perspective. And so this connected vehicle technology will allow for that, and allow for a more fewer dwell times for the customer, fewer wait times, because, you know, in theory, I get on my bus, it brings me to the subway station, the subway is there, and the subway train is there. I mean, when I take the time to walk through, and for the bulk of customers anyway, that machine learning as well can be applied to adjust the service in real time to optimize the transit experience, the customer's experience. But also, you mentioned railway crossings. There are significant safety benefits of this technology as you synchronize the passing of railway train and the crossing of transit vehicles. There's significant other safety benefits in terms of just collision avoidance, of course, and preventing fatalities of pedestrians and cyclists. So there are green benefits as well. Of course, it can go on and on and on. Right?
For sure. And I mean, two of the things coming out of this, and this segues into our final question about the economic growth of the region. One of it is when we've got all these systems connected, as you say, you can operate this efficient system, but you can also privilege transit. You can privilege traffic lights and right of ways to transit over cars. And there's no doubt that's where we're going to have to go, not just for climate action, but for congestion, economic growth. And then, as you note, the safety component, we're doing this rail conference the second year in a row. We've been doing rail innovation at QTRIC for a couple of years now. And there are a lot of really sad stories in Canada about buses hitting trains, and that should never happen, whether it's Ottawa or it's a track in the middle of the British Columbian Mountains. It should never happen that a rail comes off track or that it hits a bus or it hits a streetcar, but it does happen. And so these are the issues that can be resolved through system planning. And I'm really excited about the technology that TTC is pushing forward to make that happen. And that leads us to the final question. And Chair and Councillor, I'll come back to you. And then Ben, of course, if you have final comments on it. When we talk to our GTHA communities, like our public transit agencies that are on the backbone of Metrolink stations, we often hear that the growth of rail is important, but it's not always well coordinated with the cities around the Toronto area. And one story I'll give you is when I used to go out to Oxford County regularly, like Woodstock has a small transit agency. And I used to hear my colleagues in Woodstock say like, the GO expansion, and I used to say, why would you be opposed to the GO expansion? It's a great thing because as GO expanded, Via Rail dropped off and Via was our direct link to downtown Toronto. So there's all these unintended consequences as we expand. Can you walk us through, Councillor, what the plan ahead is, what it looks like for the economic growth of the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, all of those communities, even maybe all the way out to Niagara, when we expand rail the way that we're talking about expanding and integrate with the TTC plans in Toronto?
Okay, thanks so much. I just want to apologize. I had some camera issues, but my audio has worked the whole time, so that's what matters. What was holding up my camera became loose. So anyway, it's another really important question, and I have to tell you, we have a laser focus on this. Pre-pandemic, about 13% of trips on the TTC originated outside of the city of Toronto. That number we all know is going to grow. And many workers commute into the city from surrounding regions. That's elementary. So it makes transit a viable option for communities to really achieve, all of us, economic, infrastructure, environmental objectives, right? It's great for everybody. Everybody wins. And there's already dozens of close connections between the TTC networks and neighboring transit systems, as well as the regional GO rail networks. So we're finding many transit users are making use of the cross-boundary links every day. The plan, as we've talked about today, the provincial expansion projects will further contribute to our regional rail network. And I think the province actually, again, is very focused on that. I can tell you they are. And the Board of Trade just did a study and they talk endlessly about how important regional fare and service integration are, in particular, how the GO rail system could be used more effectively. And I think you and I've talked about this before, but I'll also just use this example because it really lays it out nicely. The example of a commuter trip originating at Markham and Steeles that takes 92 minutes using the TTC network and could be shrunk down to 52 minutes using a combination of the TTC bus network and then Milliken GO. So the issue is that it would cost about $10. Probably $10.87 to take the shorter route and only $3.25 to travel the entire way on the TTC. So we want things to be accessible, inexpensive, and those are very important things. So I can tell you clearly the TTC has taken a leadership role on this within the GTA on both fare and service integration. We're working very closely. There's daily conversations with our provincial partners, and we've been very focused on the cross-boundary bus services and coordination of fares. So it's not there yet, I will admit that, but there's encouraging progress. And I have to, if you don't know this, how we're surviving right now is the Safe Restart Agreement between the province and the City of Toronto. And that was built in as a condition for funding, that we demonstrate that we're committed to fair integration and transit integration, quite frankly, that remains a top priority for the province and the city. That is built into the Safe Restart Agreement. So we're locked in. And I'm very optimistic that you're going to see movement on this file. And the TTC is also improving, BEM talked about it, the first mile, last mile connections to make rapid transit more accessible. So just again, this weekend, we had another presser on the autonomous vehicle shuttle pilot in the east end of the city, Rouge Hill. And so it's solutions like AV shuttle technology, which will help connect people to the rail network in areas that were previously underserved by conventional transit. So that was just on the weekend. We're really trying to roll that out quickly because we want to beat all the other municipalities.
Well, and I completely agree with that sentiment. Councillor Jay Robinson, BEM Case, Executive Director of that sustainability group now at the TTC. In the interest of time, we're going to have to wrap it up here today, but we're hoping to have you back again next year, hear the next great things ahead as we build a global city with global mobility for all citizens. Thank you to you both.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed being here today.
Thank you.